Вітаємо вас, дорогі глядачі, на українській телемережі «Контакт». Я ваша ведуча Марта Czurylowicz. Як звичайно, кожного літа надалі щотижня випускаємо для вас нові цікаві програми. Гасло цьогорічного свята незалежності в Торонті є 100 років боротьби за волю України – від січових стрільців до АТО. Напередодні цих святкувань незалежності України пропонуємо вам наукову інформацію про героїчних борців за цю незалежність – українських січових стрільців. Виставка української єврейської зустрічі від давнини до 1914 року вже в Едмонтоні, а на програмі сьогодні покажемо уривки успішного відкриття виставки в Інституті Святого Володимира в Торонті. Учні середньої школи Michael Power St. Joseph High School в Торонто були запрошені на цікавий виховний експеримент, а саме намалювати картини до тем, описаних в міжнародному шедеврі Animal Farm. У своїй рубриці Stay Ukrainian, my friends, Рон Когут розмовляє з членами творчої групи «KONTAKT Колектив», які зорганізували для громади зустріч з режисером Остапом Костюком та презентацію його документального фільму про життя вівчарів українських Карпат під назвою «Жива ватра».
Новини з України, спонсоровані за основним концертом Української капелі бандуристів імені Тараса Шевченка разом із Русланою 24 жовтня в Торонто Месі Холл. Новини з України, спонсоровані за основним концертом Української капелі бандуристів імені Тараса Шевченка разом із Русланою 24 жовтня в Торонто Месі Холл.
Учні середньої школи Michael Power St. Joseph High School в Торонто були запрошені на цікавий виховний експеримент, а саме намалювати картини до тем, описаних в міжнародному шедеврі Animal Farm.
Недавно в Торонто відбулася цікава виставка робіт учнів із школи Michael Power, які в рамках курсу «Канада та світові питання» вивчали події Голодомору в Україні та події на Майдані, розповідає вчитель цього курсу Надія Герера.
Students were doing little presentations on current issues, and they chose timely pieces that had to do with Nadia Shevchenko and also the assassination of Boris Nemtsov and so on and so forth. So it was naturally in the discussion of the class, and then from there, because we kept following current issues, it brought us back to the current crisis in Ukraine. And I tweeted at Andrea and said, we're talking about some of your articles in class, and I mentioned your book because it's really difficult to understand the current crisis in Ukraine without understanding the history. So in doing so, she then called me and we started going from there. And I thought, okay, great, since I'm teaching the history, why not tie in the importance of the very thing that helped to bring a voice to Ukrainians who were in the DP camps after World War II. So it was a natural fit. We couldn't have thought of it unless it just sort of organically came about. And so here we are, so many months later.
Надії вдалося використати в своєму курсі книжку автора та української активістки з Нью-Йорку Андреї Халупи «Orwell and Refugees». Okay, Andrea, so what do you think when you see the works of the students and the impact your book had on them? What do you think, where you write in the book, was this purpose to educate young minds, or was it a different purpose in the beginning?
So I wrote my book to actually educate my nieces. I wanted them to know where they came from, what their ancestors had lived through. And I had no idea that the book would become viral and lead to events here in Canada with such brilliant students doing amazing artwork. So today I feel very, very overwhelmed.
80 years ago, the Kremlin was telling a story that this never happened, this didn't exist. And unfortunately, they didn't realize that stories that are based on lies disappear. Those are weak stories, they don't last. But stories that come from a place that's true, those are the ones that become immortal. So here you have, at the same time, you have the Kremlin lying, you have one of the most powerful governments in the world lying, and their story seems to be doing quite well around the world. you have a sick writer in London who who just lost his wife and suddenly became a single father to a baby boy, and he's all alone in his apartment in London, and he's writing a story that's true. And soon the entire world listened to him because he was telling a story that was true. With my final piece of advice is, don't be afraid of how powerful you are. Don't be afraid of how much your voice matters in the global conversation. Don't be afraid of the fact that the photographs of your work are going to now travel around the world, and it's going to be shown to people who really need to be comforted right now. So, you can't clap me off stage. So just understand that, Orwell was one person. He was one person against a giant machine, so to speak, and that one voice mattered, and your one voice matters. You have a seat at the larger conversation. You have a seat at global affairs. And it's really important that you not be afraid of that you not run from that you embrace it and understand that there's so many people on the other side of the world that don't have that option, that don't have a voice. And it's really, I want you to think that it's for them that you need to speak for.
Питання самовизначення та боротьби за демократичне життя були оригінально виражені у студентських роботах.
The whole idea with the horses relating back to Animal Farm, not only being a barcode, but also bars. So also relating back to the idea of a prison, right? So down here I have the date of independence for Ukraine, and also over here one of the first deaths that happened in Ukraine, and when the first riots broke out. So to relate it back to the whole, not only with the dates, but I wanted to put the Ukrainian flag in there, and with some of the pictures from the riots.
Before you read Andrei's book, did you know anything about the famine in Ukraine or Maidan?
I really had no idea of what was actually really going on there. So after reading her book, it really inspired me to create something like this, and I really wanted to not just make it another project in school, but actually put my 100% effort to making something that would speak to the people.
Добре, то, будь ласка, Наталю, розкажи нам, що ти навчилася, прочитавши цю книжку Андрія Халупи?
Перш за все, ми, прочитавши книжку, ми навчились про Голодомор, тобто статистику, коли це сталося, але також ми навчилися, наскільки це впливало на життя людей, особисто українців, і також про боротьбу за демократію, за права людей та всі репресії, що проти українців та проти націй в світі.
Розкажи мені трошки про свою роботу, що вона символізує.
Це тут я зобразила демократію, тобто є права людей як боротьбу, і також зобразила репресію, все чорне, тут ще показано також з кров'ю, це ту репресію, яка була проти українців, і рука символізує цю красу, коли людина бореться за свої права, за свою історію та культуру.
The world today can be different. Every voice can be heard. Don't let the deaths go unnoticed. Don't let the struggle go unnoticed.
This fall, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation and its project partners will be launching the Holodomor National Awareness Tour, a 40-foot mobile classroom that will travel to schools to educate and engage students on genocide and the impact of hate and intolerance through the example of the history of the Holodomor. As a member of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress National Holodomor Awareness Committee and member of the Holodomor National Awareness Tour project planning team, I'm excited to be part of this important project. And I'm hoping the first school we visit is Michael Power St. Joseph High School.
You know, our community started doing the Holodomor, about 50 years ago in Canada. At that time, we found it very difficult. We found it difficult to find anybody who would listen to us, anybody who would take an active role in the famine genocide. Then the famine genocide was handed over to the people who suffered through the famine, like Mr. Nateshko and many, many others. But soon they died off, and we were left with almost nobody who would talk about the famine, until we went to the schools and met the students and found out that they are the future. They will take the torch. They will hold it high. They will tell the world about the Ukraine struggle for freedom, for democracy, for a future that children can live everywhere in the whole world like we live in Canada.
Виставка української єврейської зустрічі від давнини до 1914 року вже в Едмонтоні, а на програмі сьогодні покажемо уривки успішного відкриття виставки в Інституті Святого Володимира в Торонті.
So this is a traveling exhibition. It started off in Vaughan, and then it went to Winnipeg and came back here, and it's going to go to Edmonton and to Montreal in a bilingual version, and it might even go to New York and Chicago, and in the Ukrainian version to Ukraine, and in Hebrew to Israel. Exhibits need to convey a message, and this particular narrative and the way things have come together conveys, in my view, a number of interrelated messages.
On behalf of UJE, we certainly welcome all of you here this evening, and it's a fabulous turnout.
This exhibition is the product of Alti's imagination, and the product of her work and the product of her persuasive abilities, because if it had not been for Alti speaking to Minister Kenny and the citizenship and immigration people, we wouldn't have had the support from the federal government, which was quite a substantial number, and allowed us to put on this quality exhibition.
First of all, the very long history of Jews on Ukrainian lands. Jews have been present on Ukrainian lands for over 2,000 years. That's twice as much as the number of years that they've been present in Poland, by the way. So there was a Żydov corner, a quarter rather, in Kiev in the 9th, 10th century. Jews spoke Slavic at that time as their first language. So the long history is important. They're not newcomers to these lands. Secondly, Jewish life and culture flourished on Ukrainian lands. You have here segments of the exhibition that tell you about Hebrew and Yiddish printing on Ukrainian lands, many such centers from the 17th century on. Ukraine was the place of origin of the Hasidic movement. When one visits now, and especially if one looks into the history, one becomes aware of the many stately synagogues, the wooden synagogues, the beautifully decorated interiors of these synagogues. And it's clear that while there were times of crisis, there were also long stretches of normal life and a flourishing cultural life for Jews. Related to that are the cross-cultural influences. Living side by side, these two peoples influenced each other's cultures. It went more from Ukrainians to Jews because Ukrainians were the majority in the areas where Jews were living. The stories are intertwined, and we say this in our brochure, that our stories are incomplete without each other, and you can read this in a variety of ways. But the important thing to take into consideration is the broader context, that these were two stateless peoples living in empires to which they were subjected. You had the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Tsarist Russia, the Austrian Empire, and the two peoples were similarly subjected to these rulers, at times in oppressive ways. You had serfdom, that was a defining feature for Ukrainians in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, and suppression of Ukrainian culture in the 19th century. For Jews, you had restrictions, expulsions, blood libels, some unpretty things, but also normal times. But the times of conflict and crisis have overtaken the narrative, and as a result, what we have is two separate narratives that have become entrenched in the two communities. And the fifth message, and I think perhaps the most important one to take away because it has a bearing on the present, is how do we address stereotypes that have emerged because of the separate narratives and the times of conflict. The novelty of this exhibition is that it brings together the two narratives in one account, showing parallels, showing how the same events are perceived from different perspectives. And in this way, we are shedding light on the stereotypes, comparing how the same events are viewed, especially the difficult events.
The fact that Minister Oliver is here to address us is reflective of how the current government feels about our community, that is to say, my Ukrainian community and the Jewish community. And perhaps also very interestingly from our standpoint, and not surprisingly at all, Minister Oliver can trace his roots back to Ukraine.
Dobry večer, erev tov, good evening, everyone. This traveling showcase is really a first in the world. It's a wonderful opportunity for Canadians to learn more about the context and the varying perspectives on important historical periods and events that have shaped the Ukrainian-Jewish relationship. Today's exhibit aims to create a shared historical narrative based on fact determined by scholars from around the world. Ukrainians and Jews of Ukrainian origin are distinct in their creeds and unique in their historical experiences, but what brings them together beyond a common land and the stories they share are the hardships that they confronted and their extraordinary ability to surmount challenges, persevere, and preserve their cultural, religious, and national identities. The protection of Ukrainian territorial integrity and the existential threat faced by Israel. Our government takes a principled position in a world where many countries prefer to go along to get along. We strongly support Ukraine in word, as when Prime Minister Harper confronted Vladimir Putin at a G20 meeting that I happened to be attending, he looked them in the eye and he said, "Get out of Ukraine."
I just wanted to say thank you tonight and congratulate you. I just wanted to congratulate you, Mr. Temerty, your entire board, your advisory board, your academic boards, all of the people who volunteer their time, their insights, their knowledge, not only to this wonderful exhibit, but to building understanding, to helping to educate us on the shared history of our two peoples, and to build common understanding between the two.
On behalf of the Board of Directors, it is my pleasure to welcome you to St. Vladimir Institute. It was with great enthusiasm that we became involved in this project. It is with great pride that we are here today as supporters of UJE and of this excellent exhibit.
Since it was founded in 1944, the Ontario branch of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada has understood the importance not only of reflecting upon our own culture, traditions, and history, but also of looking forward and being relevant to communities beyond our own. It follows then that when the Ukrainian Jewish encounter approached us, we were more than eager to help showcase an exhibit that would foster an understanding of how the histories of the Jewish and Ukrainian peoples are intertwined, one that would open our eyes to our shared experiences.
Ukraine for us was a place of great traditional Torah learning, and it was also the birthplace of modern Hebrew literature. There were, at the same time, accusations and conflicts that brought us in the 20th century into great, great difficulty. So it's important to go back, as these panels do, and to take a look at the long history and the long view. And this exhibit opens the door for discussion, for dialogue, as well as for debate. But it also opens the door for restoration, for repair, and for reconciliation.
What we can do with that history is learn how to live together, learn how to go forward. We want to really intensify our relationship. We're both diaspora communities here. We have a lot of shared interests, a lot of shared values, a lot in common, and a very common history. So it's really delightful for me as the descendant of Ukrainian Jews to be here. And it's I think, a good beginning for understanding and cooperation and working together in the community.
We see that our enemies in the past have tried to create division between us, that have tried to create ethnic tension between us. And what they're really afraid of is the power that our two communities have when they come together. And quite frankly, that is being exhibited today.
So that's the story of UJE. If not now, when then? And it's really about empathy. It's about empathy based on understanding and love. I know it's a Christian idea, but we've embraced it.
Виставку можна тепер побачити в Едмонтоні в St. John's Institute на White Avenue до 18 серпня, а в Монреалі від 1 до 11 вересня в Домі Українського національного об'єднання при 405 Fairmont Avenue.
Гасло цьогорічного свята незалежності в Торонті є 100 років боротьби за волю України від січових стрільців до АТО. Напередодні цих святкувань незалежності України пропонуємо вам наукову інформацію про героїчних борців за цю незалежність українських січових стрільців.
Розмови про культуру, спонсоровані святом Дня Незалежності, під гаслом 100 років боротьби за волю України від січових стрільців до АТО, 22 серпня в Centennial Park. When most people ruminate on their personal or group history, they are inevitably drawn to the episodes of persecution and suffering they encounter there. This is a natural psychological process. The history of Ukraine is rife with painful episodes that draw people's attention, and we hear about them often. Here I would like to focus on a fundamentally inspirational time in Ukrainian history, the period of the inception and activity of the Ukrainian Siege Riflemen, who helped Ukraine achieve independence in 1918. Many of us have heard of these brave men and, yes, women, but what do we really know about them? Professor of History Dr. Frank Sisson will enlighten us. Who were the Ukrainian Siege Riflemen and what was the context of their formation?
Ukrainian Siege Riflemen were formed at the end of 1913 and really in 1914 after the outbreak of the First World War. They were formed in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the province Crown Land of Galicia, in which in the eastern half of that province, Ukrainians were the majority. And they were extremely important in Ukrainian history because they represented the return or restoration of struggle for a Ukrainian state. In many ways, we can say that the 18th century was the last century in which there was an attempt to form a Ukrainian independent political unity. That is the age of Ivan Mazepa. And after the loss of Poltava, and later even the aspirations for struggling, the Ukrainian emigres of the 18th century, and we can say finally ending in 1791 when Vasil Kapnis goes to Berlin to try and convince Berlin possibly to help Ukrainians. We can say the 19th century was a century in which the Ukrainian movement was concentrated on nation forming, that is, forming of a culture, spreading of the Ukrainian idea. But it was only in 1895, at the end of the century, that once again the idea that there should be a Ukrainian political independence comes to the fore among Ukrainian thinkers. At that time, because there were constitutional rights in Austria-Hungary, and although the province of Galicia was largely controlled by the Polish elite, Ukrainians were able to form sporting groups, somewhat paramilitary groups, Sich, Lug, and various others. And with this came the idea, as with the youth organizations such as Plast, that there should be a Ukrainian state. When the First World War comes then, Ukrainians are willing to fight in the Austro-Hungarian army if the government will allow them to have a legion or a group. The Habsburg government at this time needed support and was willing to allow such a formation, although it kept it to a really rather small group. That is, many more young Ukrainians wanted to volunteer, as they were volunteers, to join this Ukrainian formation, rather than to be just conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian army. That also meant that in many ways it was the intellectual, political elite of Ukrainians, although there were many people from village life as well that who joined this military formation.
So you're saying that there was a cap on this, on
Yes.
the number?
Yes, very definitely a cap, and many were sent home who tried to volunteer, because initially they're only taking 2,000 into the unit. Later the units begin to grow. Of course, from the point of view of the Habsburgs, they needed this support from many of the nations or groups or nationalities of the empire, but there were, of course, contending ones. They also allow the formation of Polish legions, and obviously the goal of the Polish legions to restore a Polish state and that of the Ukrainians could conflict. Although we should remember that from the point of view of the Habsburgs, that Ukrainian state was not going to be in the Habsburg Empire. These groups are joining to fight against the Russian Empire with the hope that in this case, the Ukrainian territories of the Russian Empire could eventually they could win support with a central power victory, with the victory of the Habsburgs over the Russians, to allow a Ukrainian state, or at least autonomous unit, to be formed on that territory in the east.
Now, what were some of the consequences of the Russian occupation of Galicia during World War I?
The Russian occupation of Galicia was viewed as the reunification of the Russian lands. The Romanov family was involved in this and travels to these territories. Indeed, we can argue that one of the major war aims of Russia was the occupation of eastern Galicia. It was for them very important. It would have stamped out the Ukrainian movement in their minds. It also would fulfill certain neo-Slavophile and Orthodox dreams. There also is a persecution of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. So from the point of view of St. Petersburg, this was extremely important as they move into their territories. I might add that Ukrainians were not the only group to suffer. The Russian authorities treat the Jewish population of eastern Galicia very badly, and there are long-term memories of that as well. And the Ukrainian cause, therefore, is associated with Vienna and to a degree with Berlin against St. Petersburg because of the Russian imperial authorities' attitudes. This is also the time, as soon as the war begins, that they close down all Ukrainian activities in eastern Ukraine. There had been a little bit of liberalization after 1905. Already it was declining just before the war, and this gives the Russian imperial authorities the excuse to clamp down on all Ukrainian activities.
And were any well-known figures repressed at that time?
Yes, well, first the Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Metropolitan Andrei Sheptitsky, is arrested, deported to Russia, where he spends much of the war, and this was associated, therefore, with the attacks on the church. Mikhailo Hrushevsky, who was a professor of the University of Lviv, was a Russian citizen, and he hoped that by returning to the Russian Empire, he would in some way show that the Ukrainian movement was not anti-St. Petersburg. He hoped, I think, to save the Ukrainian activities in Kyiv because of this. He is arrested and as well deported into the Russian heartland. And then throughout eastern Galicia, almost all Ukrainian activists were under surveillance. The prosvita, or reading room, in villages were often disbanded by the Russian authorities. I might say that for the Russian army, this posed considerable problems because a large number of the troops coming into eastern Galicia were Ukrainians. And in a certain way, this was a meeting of eastern and western Ukraine. That is, for the first time, these people often came into contact, realized they spoke the same language, had the same culture. We have this very nicely described in the literary works of Vasil Stefanik, who shows how the Russian authorities, troops coming to a Ukrainian village, see a portrait of Shevchenko. Generally, the portraits of Shevchenko were reasons for the authorities to move against you, and yet they tell a simple village woman whose sons have gone to fight for the Sich riflemen that we respect the same Shevchenko that you do. And this, of course, is a beginning of understanding that there is a Ukraine that transcends the borders of empires.
The veterans of the Ukrainian Sich riflemen later formed the Ukrainian Galician Army. How crucial was this army in the struggle for the independence of Western Ukraine?
Yes, the Sich riflemen are still fighting in the Austro-Hungarian army in November, late October, early November of 1918. This is the point where the Central Powers are defeated, that in the last phases of the empire, although the imperial dynasty in Vienna had begun to give more concessions to Ukrainians, that the empire is breaking up into various national units. Ukrainians seized the march on this issue in many ways by declaring on November 1st, 1918, the existence of the Western Ukrainian Republic. I might add there already had been since 1917 the Ukrainian National Republic or Ukrainian People's Republic in eastern Ukraine. This surprised the dominant Polish authorities in Galicia, who were within 11 days going to declare not in eastern Galicia, but in the central Polish territories, a Polish state. And Poles and Ukrainians then come to a war over eastern Galicia, in which Ukrainians were the majority of the population, although not necessarily the majority of the population in the main cities such as Lviv. In this struggle, the Ukrainian Galician Army is formed, in which the best units, one can argue, come as the Sich riflemen join them in this struggle and provide much of the leadership. The Ukrainian Galician Army at its height may have had as much as 100,000 men in arms. This was a tremendous mobilization of the population. Their major problem was that unlike Poland, which could turn to the victorious allies and above all France for support, the Ukrainian cause could turn to no one, and it hoped initially that the Ukrainian National Republic, or then the government, which is being restored just at this time in eastern Ukraine, would be able to provide them support. But it, of course, is facing the Bolsheviks and the Russian whites, and so there are too many enemies for these two Ukrainian armies, which eventually will come together. The Ukrainian Galician Army fights until the spring and early summer of 1919. It's ultimately driven out of eastern Galicia because of the arrival of the so-called Haller troops, the troops that had been came from France, largely armed by France, with Poles from various groups, including from North America, fighting. This drives the Ukrainian Galician Army across the Zbruch, those who are not imprisoned or interned or flee to Czechoslovakia, which is also arising as a new state. That struggle, as with the formation of the Sich riflemen, can be seen as crucial moments in Ukrainian history. In 1914, because it meant the restoration of a struggle for Ukrainian independence, and then the struggle for Galicia, because it showed the ability of the Ukrainian movement to mobilize a large part of the population in its support, and of course to reject Polish rule, which is imposed in the middle of 1919.
Розмови про культуру, спонсоровані святом Дня Незалежності, під гаслом «100 років боротьби за волю України від січових стрільців до АТО» 22 серпня в Centennial Park.
Sponsored by Ukrainian Credit Union Believe it or not, it's Ron Cahoot with Stay Ukrainian, my friends.
We're Cossack children of history.
This evening, we're doing a film screening of our friend Ostap Kostyuk's film, Żywa Vatra, or The Living Fire. And he showed at Hot Docs. It's an international documentary film festival in Toronto where he won a prestigious prize. So that's really...
Make sure they know it's Hot Docs.
Hot Docs. It is about 3 shepherds, 3 generations of shepherds, and a young one, a middle-aged, and an older. And the 3 of them are reflecting on their lives as shepherds and how it's a kind of slowly dying out. It's a profession that's dying out, which is unfortunate.
You've seen this film?
I have. I was at the premiere.
And? You like it?
Absolutely. It was beautiful. Even just the cinematography was fantastic.
Ну, я щасливий, що я тут, що я маю нагоду показати українцям і не тільки українцям тему нашого фільму, яка про що це, що ми маємо, чим живе Україна, чим живуть прості люди в Україні і що змінюється саме в Україні в цей момент.
Так. І це про гуцули, right?
Це про гуцулів, і хоча гуцули живуть в горах високо.
You gotta love that, just by itself, то є добре, то є гуцули.
Живуть високо в горах. Ми знаємо, що це прекрасний поетичний образ пастуха гуцульського з трембітою, з вівцями, але, на жаль, цей образ саме в цей час зникає. Тому ми хотіли показати як хроніку, що відбувається зараз, щоб ми, якщо раптом зміниться все кардинально в гіршу сторону, щоб ми мали якийсь образ того часу.
Now, you're the director, так? Director, і ви написали? The screenplay, the play, or the...
Так, то я підписався під цим сценарієм, але насправді сценарій складався в процесі дослідження. Тобто ми брали все від людей, від їх життя, як в документальному кіно. Бо будували розповідь з їхніх розповідей, з їхніх побажань, ми йшли за ними і в процесі писали сценарій.
Рідна професія була з малого хлопця. З 10 років я пішов цими полонинами, та й любив я ці вівці, та й любив коні, та й любив природу, та й любив все.
А той гадак, що ви дістали? Може, гроші?
Кусок скла і чек.
І чек?
Так.
Yeah, and maybe a Tim's card or something? No?
Мені хотілося показати в українській спільноті фільм про українців. Не всі могли потрапити до фестивалю, там були продані квитки вже всі. Але щоб бачили українці, я так розумію, що то є пласт, що тут є багато дітей, молодь, щоб бачила, що є Україна зараз, які вона має проблеми, чим вона живе.
А чи це буде на відео?
Офіційна дистрибуція починається восени. І це будуть і диски, і такі театральні покази в кінотеатрах. А зараз фестивалі, таке фестивальне коло спочатку по всіх фестивалях, а пізніше до продажу.
Мене ніколи не сперло ні ніч, ні буря, ніякі дощі, ніякі браки, нічого мене не спирало.
If you don't know anything about Hutsuls, you gotta watch this just to learn something about Hutsuls. That's why I'm a Ukrainian, because of Hutsuls. I'm not a Hutsul. I'm a little too large, but they're the greatest, the Hutsul people. They're the greatest. They're our version of what? I don't know. They're our version of Hutsule. That's what they are. Come and see the film. Stay Ukrainian. He does. They do. We all do. In keeping with Cossack collectives, genre, I suppose, or you guys are always, you like to be a little bit south of North Carolina, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you started this, was this your sort of, you decided to get together and say, we want to do this stuff, but we want to do it just with a little twist?
Specifically with Kosa? Yeah, of course. We saw culture being displayed specifically in Toronto, and Kultura was something just on a stage. You watch the singers, you watch the dancers, but we wanted a more participatory culture. We wanted people to come together and celebrate Ukrainian culture or Slavic culture and learn things and teach each other things. So it's more of an exchange than just watching.
Learn things is a key expression because a lot of these things, the Hromada here is not familiar with.
Absolutely not. Yeah, so we're trying to bring back those traditions like Ivana Kupala or teaching Vishitya, for example. You know, we're trying to do things that maybe people have forgotten, or maybe it's something that they don't want to do, but maybe they don't know that they want to do it until they come out.
But even, you know, Ivana Kupala and all these things that we've done, there's the way we do it, and then there's the way they do it. And you're tending to bring this new Ukrainian culture. But it's not. It's just, it's different. And how's that going? Are you getting any resistance?
Actually, surprisingly, no. I think at the beginning, we had a bit of resistance, but just kind of whispers here and there about things that we were doing. Exactly. But because we live in Toronto, we live in a multicultural city, the most multicultural city, I would say. Of course, we need to cater to everybody, and so anyone is invited to all our events. And we do. We have so many people coming to our events, not just Ukrainians, which is fantastic.
Sponsored by Ukrainian Credit Union. Believe it or not, it's Ron Kohut with Stay Ukrainian, my friends.
We're Cossack children of history.
Громадські оголошення «Що коли іде» спонсоровані Cardinal Funeral Homes Limited. Новий шлях – кольоровий тижневик із двомовними матеріалами.
Україномовний тижневик «Хомен України» інформує українську діаспору понад 50 років.
Газета Ukrainian Weekly – англійське слово про Україну.
Українські вісті – Canada's bi-weekly Ukrainian news. Subscribe today. Call 780-488-3693 for 3 free trial issues.
Інститут краси та здоров'я Formula Life вже 10 років готує висококваліфікованих спеціалістів в області косметології. Програма навчання інституту детально ознайомлює своїх студентів із найновішими досягненнями сучасної косметологічної медицини.
Наші класи відкриті для вас кожного місяця. В будь-який час можете приєднатися до наших класів.
Українська православна церква святого апостола Андрія Первозванного запрошує на відзначення свята Хрещення Руси України 9 серпня. Початок о 9:30 зі святої літургії, обід з програмою о 12:00. Квитки коштують $30. Адреса церкви 1630 Дюпонт Стріт в Торонто. Українська православна церква святого Юрія в місті Сент-Кетрін запрошує вас на щорічний винний тур Niagara-on-the-Lake. За подальшою інформацією звертайтесь до пані Наталі за телефоном 905-892-1266.
Юнацька капела бандуристів імені Віри Зелінської «Золоті струни» запрошує дітей віком від 6 років на щорічний музичний табір бандури і співу під гаслом «Співуча юність», який відбудеться на пластовій оселі у Грефтон з 16 по 22 серпня.
Повідомляємо про відзначення Дня Незалежності України 22 серпня в Отаві у пабі Royal Oaks. Адреса 221 Echo Drive. Початок о 5:30 вечора. Конгрес українців Канади відділ Торонто запрошує вас на святкування 24-ї річниці Незалежності України в Centennial Park 22 серпня.
Початок свята о 10-й годині рано, а урочисте відкриття в 1-й годині. Концерт починається в 2-й годині пополудні, а забава в 7-й годині вечором. До забави приграватимуть худі а моцні і хлопці з міста.
Конгрес українців Канади відділ Віндзор запрошує вас на фестиваль до Дня української спадщини у неділю 23 серпня. Адреса – Українська католицька церква Святого Володимира та Ольги, 601 Lake Trail Drive, місто Віндзор. Початок о 12-й годині обіду.
Коса-колектив запрошує вас на фольклорний табір, що відбудеться від 24 до 30 серпня у Графтон, Онтаріо. Цілий тиждень різних гутірок на тему ручних робіт, пісні, танці і традиційної української кухні на базі українсько-канадської спадщини. Щоб зареєструватися, просимо відвідати www.folkcamp.ca.
Конгрес українців Канади відділ Сент-Кетрінс запрошує усіх на святкування Українського дня спадщини в суботу, 12 вересня, при залі церкви Святого Івана Богослова. Адреса 91 Lakeshore Road, St. Catharines. Початок о 4 годині.
Запрошуємо вас на засновний концерт Української капелі бандуристів імені Тараса Шевченка разом з Русланою 24 жовтня в Торонто Месі Холл. Квитки продаються в messyhall.com, Ticketmaster і у відділах Української кредитової спілки. За дальшими інформаціями відвідайте bandura.org.
От і закінчилася наша сьогоднішня передача. Дякуємо, що ви сьогодні провели цю годину разом з нами. Наступного тижня представимо вам продовження інформації про борців за незалежність України січових стрільців. До наступної зустрічі для контакту я ваша ведуча Марта Czurylowicz. На все добре.
Я візьму тебе за ногу, грамотрина на підлогу. Добре, що жива. Вивелися і не кисло, а банку не боїшся. Дрова чи дрова, бо те, що було.